You have gathered here not merely to listen to words, but to stand at the threshold of a truth that your mind may resist and your soul may already know. We are speaking of what happens to the soul in the first 49 days after death, a span of time, not arbitrary, not invented by superstition, but woven into the psychic fabric of humanity itself, across cultures, across ages. The number 7 multiplied by 7 appears as a pattern of transition, a liminal season where the ego has already been released from its mortal shell. Yet, the totality of the self has not yet completed its journey to the next configuration of being. It is in this time that the mysteries of the unconscious are revealed with such clarity that, to the soul, it is both liberation and judgment. I must tell you, when we speak of death in psychological terms, we are never merely speaking of biological cessation. The psyche knows many deaths, in dreams, in crises, in the ending of a great love, in the loss of meaning. You have tasted the archetype of death already. This is why I tell you, the moment you call your last breath will not be unfamiliar. You have been rehearsing it in your depth, perhaps without knowing, in every transition where something in you fell away and something else was asked to be born. But the 49 days after the body releases, the soul are unique because there is no more veil of physical sensation to distract from the reality of the inner world. You are thrown naked into the field of your own psyche, the very landscape you have cultivated, ignored, or polluted during your earthly life. Imagine for a moment that all your dreams, the ones you forgot upon waking, and the ones that haunted you for years, become your soul environment. There is no waking up to reassure yourself it was only a dream. The soul, in the first days after death, encounters this dreamscape with astonishing vividness, because the brain, that imperfect filter, is no longer in control. The self, the totality of conscious and unconscious, becomes the only reality. Here, the archetypes take on a density and tangibility greater than anything the body ever knew. You may meet the wise old man, the shadow, the anima or animus, not as concepts in a lecture hall, but as living presences whose gaze sees through the entirety of your existence. The first period in these 49 days is the most disorienting, for the ego struggles to understand what has occurred. If in life you were attached entirely to material existence, the separation will feel like a violent tearing. If you cultivated inner awareness, it will be a great unveiling, an almost ecstatic recognition. So this is what I have always known. But for most souls, there is a mixture, wonder intertwined with terror, familiarity woven with alien strangeness. The Tibetan sages spoke of the bardo, the in-between, where peaceful and wrathful deities appear. I have always felt these are not foreign gods, but our own archetypal contents, revealing themselves with masks that our culture and psyche can bear to behold. The wrathful figures are no more evil than the storm that tears through a forest. They are energies of transformation, demanding we release what is not truly ours. As the days progress, time itself begins to dissolve. 49 days is a human measure, a symbolic frame, but for the soul. It is not counted in hours or sunsets. It is measured in the rate at which the ego can integrate or release its attachments. This is why the experiences vary so profoundly. For one soul, 49 days may feel like an instant. For another, like an endless wandering through mirrors of one's own making. The unconscious is vast, and in this liminal stage, there is nowhere else to go but into its depths. Here, the soul is confronted with the shadow in its purest form. In life, we project our shadow onto others, the people we despise, the strangers whose motives we doubt, the figures in history we call monsters. But here, in the realm between, there is no other to bear it for us. The shadow approaches not as a distant shape, but as yourself, perhaps the self you never admitted existed. Some souls turn away, and in turning away, they create for themselves realms of confusion, wandering in landscapes of half-light. Others, with courage or perhaps desperation, turn towards a shadow and realize it was not an enemy but a long-lost twin, carrying the gold of the soul in its dark hands. This encounter is one of the great tasks of the 49 days, to reclaim what you rejected in yourself before the next stage of being. I tell you now, the archetype of the guide appears often in this phase. It may be an ancestor, a beloved teacher, or a figure of light you cannot name. The guide is not there to comfort in the sentimental sense. Rather, they exist to hold the thread so you do not lose yourself entirely in the labyrinth. Sometimes the guide appears as a stranger. This too is archetypal, but the stranger has always been the one who carries a message from beyond the village walls. In my own work, I have seen countless dreams where the unconscious presents help, informs. The ego resists the beggar, the madman, the foreigner. So it is in the 49 days, your willingness to recognize the guide, even when they do not fit your expectations, determines much about the ease of your passage. One must remember that the soul's reality here is shaped by the psychic patterns you forged in life. If you were governed by fear, you may encounter these days as a succession of trials. If you lived in pursuit of truth, you may find them as doors opening, one after another. Yet, there is no punishment here in the human sense, only the inexorable law that what is within will be revealed without. Heaven and hell are not geographical destinations, but psychic states. This is why I have said that in the after-death journey, you meet nothing but yourself, magnified by the absence of illusion. In this in-between, dreams of life may replay, but they are not mere memories. They are alchemical stages, invitations to see with new eyes what you could not accept before. You may re-experience the wound you thought you had forgotten, only to realize that it was the seed of your greatest strength. You may encounter those you harmed, not to be condemned by them, but to witness the ripple of your actions across the great web of being. This is not the moral bookkeeping of a petty judge. It is the unveiling of reality itself, where every act, thought, and omission reveals its true weight. Around the midpoint of the 49 days, something begins to shift. The soul starts to shed the last traces of its earthly identity, though not always willingly. Here is where longing becomes both the bridge and the snare. If your longing is pure for truth, for the divine, for union with the self, it will draw you towards the higher realms of integration. If your longing clings to possessions, to status, to the control you once held, it will entangle you in phantoms of your own making, delaying the forward movement. I have seen this in the dreams of the living people trapped in endless repetitions because they cannot release the image of themselves. They have grown accustomed to. This is why the living in so many traditions offer prayers, chants, and remembrances during this period, not because they can alter the soul's destiny in a mechanical way, but because love and intention from the living create a resonance, a reminder that there is something beyond the shadows and lights of the in-between. It is as if the soul, wandering in the dream, hears a distant melody, and in that melody remembers that it is not alone. By the final phase of the 49 days, the soul stands at the threshold once more. It has faced the shadow, met the guide, walked through the mirrors of its own unconscious. Now comes the decision. That is not a decision, the movement into whatever form the next stage requires. For some, this is the great merging with the self in its fullest sense, a union with what you might call God, or the ground of being. For others, there is the return, not as punishment, but as the continuation of a process not yet complete. This, too, is part of the archetypal cycle. Descent, initiation, we turn, you see, then that the 49 days are not an external rule imposed upon the soul, but a reflection of deep psychic law. 7 times 7, a square of completeness within completeness, is a symbol as old as humanity. It marks the stages of transformation in the womb of the unconscious before rebirth into a new state. In life, you may experience your own 49-day passages after a great inner death, whether you are aware of the count or not. The psyche has its rhythms, and it honors them even when the ego believes it is in control. If you understand this, you will not wait until your physical death to begin the work. You will meet your shadow now. While the mirror is still half veiled, you will learn to recognize your guide in unexpected phases. You will practice release so that when the day comes, the letting go will be like exhaling into an ocean you have always known. Then, when you find yourself in the 49 days, you will not be a frightened wanderer, but a traveler who knows that every figure, every landscape, every terror, and every joy is a symbol in the great book of the soul, inviting you deeper into the truth that has no end. And so, as we pass deeper into the hidden corridors of those 49 days, the psychic atmosphere begins to change. In the earlier phase, the landscapes are dense with the residue of earthly impressions. In streets you once walked, rooms you once inhabited, the smell of familiar seasons, these are the constructs the ego uses to orient itself, illusions borrowed from memory so that the soul is not immediately overwhelmed by the vast, unmediated archetypal field. But as the days drift, or rather, as the currents of psychic transformation carry you, these familiar images begin to dissolve like ink in water. The walls of your remembered rooms become transparent. The streets lead not to destinations, but into oceans of light or forests without end. And the sky above shifts in hue and shape according to the unspoken language of your inner state. It is in this middle passage that the soul encounters what I call the threshold archetypes, figures and forces that appear when the psyche is preparing to cross from one domain of being to another. In dreams, they may appear as bridges, gates, ferrymen, or mysterious hosts who lead you into banquet halls or abandoned temples. Here, they are far more potent because the entire psychic body is involved, not merely a dream fragment in the sleeping mind. The threshold is not a line you step over, but a total reconfiguration of your psychic orientation. The guide, if they still accompany you, becomes more insistent. Now, for this is the place where many linger, unwilling to move forward, hypnotized by the beauty or terror of what they see. At this stage, the shadow often returns, but in a subtler form, no longer the overtly frightening or grotesque figure. It may appear as someone utterly ordinary, perhaps a childhood friend, a co-worker, or even a stranger whose eyes carry a peculiar familiarity. The ego, relieved to see something normal, might relax, but this is precisely the test. The shadow here is disguised because the soul must learn to recognize it, not only in its monstrous forms, but in its everyday masks, the way resentment can hide in kindness, the way fear can masquerade as love, the way control can disguise itself as protection. If you can look at this figure and see through the mask without judgment, recognizing it as a fragment of yourself that seeks integration, you pass through the gate with greater ease. By now, the linear sense of days is almost entirely gone. The 49 is no longer a calendar, but a symbolic gestation period, and the psyche is in a state akin to a fetus suspended between worlds. The womb, in this case, is the collective unconscious, an ocean in which you are both an individual droplet and the whole sea. Here you may encounter archetypes you never knew existed in you, for they belong not to your personal history but to humanity itself. The Great Mother may appear, vast and encompassing, offering both comfort and the suffocating weight of total dissolution. The trickster may emerge, shifting forms, challenging your assumptions and unraveling the narratives you clung to. These are not mere characters, but forces, and to meet them is to experience the raw texture of existence. In this state, communication is no longer through words or even images in the ordinary sense. Meaning is transmitted directly like a resonance, and it vibrates through the whole field of your being. You understand things without knowing how you understand them, and sometimes the knowledge is unbearable because it leaves no room for the illusions that once protected you. You might see all at once the entire arc of your life and realize that every act, no matter how small, was part of a pattern far larger than your conscious mind could ever grasp. This can fill you with profound peace or with despair if you realize how much of your time was spent resisting your own destiny. Around this time, the soul may encounter what mystics have called the mirror of the self. It is not a mirror of glass, but a reflective field in which you see not only who you were, but who you truly are, beneath all personas and defenses. Some souls find this unbearable and turn away, retreating into dreamlike repetitions of earthly life to avoid the confrontation. Others stand before it and weep not from shame, but from the recognition that they have been both the betrayer and the betrayed, the destroyer and the savior, and that all these aspects were threads in a single tapestry. This is the point where the possibility of true integration emerges, for if you can accept the whole of what you are no longer bound by it. In certain cases, the soul will experience what can only be described as symbolic death within death, a surrender so complete that even the subtle identity it carried into the afterlife dissolves. This is the archetypal second death found in many traditions, where the soul ceases to cling to any form and allows itself to become pure potential. To the ego, this is annihilation. To the self, it is the long-awaited homecoming. Those who pass through this second death do not disappear, but their being shifts into a state beyond the duality of form and formlessness, life and death. They enter the deeper mystery, which no human words can truly capture, but not all are ready for that step. Many will instead be drawn toward the currents that lead them back into incarnation. This is not failure, nor is it reward. It is simply the movement of the soul's unfinished work. The attachments that remain to people, to unlearned lessons, to unresolved shadows, act like magnetic lines pulling the soul toward a new life, where these threads can be woven into a fuller pattern. In these final days of the 49, the soul often has a last choice point. Though it may not feel like a conscious choice, it is more like leaning into one current or another, guided by the sum of all inner tendencies. As the final moments of this period arrive, the threshold opens once again. For some, it is a radiant expanse. For others, a tunnel, a bridge, or a great river. The archetype of the ferryman is common here. Charon in the Greek myths, but he may appear in countless guises. He does not judge, he merely carries. If you step onto his vessel, you are carried into the unknown, with the knowledge that something essential has been completed. If you turn away, you may awaken in a cradle, taking your first breath in a new body. The memory of these 49 days, fading into the dream stuff of your next life, Yet somewhere, deep in the unconscious, the imprint remains, shaping your instincts, your fears, your inexplicably loves. I tell you this not to romanticize death, nor to frighten you, but to remind you that you are already living your way into that journey. The landscapes you will walk in those 49 days are being shaped now in every dream you neglect, in every truth you deny, in every act of love you dare to make. The shadow you will meet then is the shadow you are meeting or avoiding today. The guide who will appear is already knocking in the faces of strangers. The sudden words of a book, the dream that lingers all morning. If you train your eyes to see them now, you will recognize them then, and your passage will not be a blind stumble, but a conscious crossing. And so I ask you, live as though the 49 days have already begun, for, in a way, they have. The soul is always between worlds, always dying and being born, always walking from one state into another. The only question is whether you will walk that path with your eyes closed or open, seeing the archetypes not as enemies or fantasies, but as the ancient companions they have always been. As we draw nearer to the culmination of these 49 days, the psychic atmosphere becomes charged with a quality that is difficult to describe in the language of the living. It is as if the air itself, if one can still speak of air, vibrates with an intelligence that is not separate from you, yet feels vaster than anything you could ever claim as your own. In life, you might sense this presence in rare moments, when beauty strikes you so deeply you cannot breathe, or when you awaken from a dream, feeling as if you have touched a truth too immense to hold. Here, in the final phase, that presence is constant. It surrounds you, penetrates you, becomes you. It is what I have called the self, the central archetype, the organizing principle of the psyche, the image of God within us. In these last stages, you begin to sense that every figure you met, every trial you faced, every shadow and every guide was in fact the self in one of its masks. Even the frightening encounters were orchestrated not by an external judge, but by your own deeper being, which seeks always to restore wholeness. This realization is not an intellectual insight, but an all-encompassing vision, as if you are standing on a height from which you can see the entire landscape of your existence stretched out before you, not as a flat line of past, present, and future, but as a living mandala in which every event, no matter how painful or seemingly trivial, occupies its necessary place. The number 49 itself begins to reveal its symbolic resonance. 7 days, the cycle of creation and rest, multiplied by itself, becomes the great square of transformation. In the geometry of the psyche, this is not mere numerology, it is the deep pattern by which the unconscious measures the phases of integration, 7 stages within 7 stages, each one a death and a birth, each one dissolving a layer of the false self and allowing another facet of the true self to emerge. You begin to understand that these 49 days are not merely about where the soul will go next, but about the completion of a cycle, the harvest of a lifetime's work in the soil of the soul. It is here that the emotional intensity reaches its peak. For some, it is an overwhelming bliss, the joy of coming home after a long exile. For others, it is an exquisite grief, as the final attachments to what was to loved ones, to unfinished dreams, to the familiar texture of the human world are released. This grief is not a despair of loss, but the sacred grief that comes when the heart finally opens wide enough to let everything go. In this release, something extraordinary happens. You realize that nothing is truly lost. Every person you loved, every moment of meaning, every act of creation still exists, held within the eternal field of the self. It is no longer yours in the possessive sense, but it is part of you in the deepest sense, inseparable from the totality you are becoming. During this peak, visions of astonishing clarity may arise. Some souls see themselves as threads in an infinite tapestry, others as notes in a cosmic symphony, still others as sparks returning to a great fire. These are not poetic metaphors, but direct perceptions, and they bring with them a certainty that no philosophical argument can give. You see, you are the division between observer and observed collapses, and for a moment or an eternity, for time no longer has meaning. You experience unity without boundary, and yet, even in this unity, the archetypal drama continues, for the psyche moves in symbols until the very last threshold is crossed. You may encounter a final guardian, a figure who asks a question or presents a challenge that, in some sense, sums up the essence of your life's journey. It may not be a question in words. It may be a scene you are asked to step into, a choice you are asked to make without hesitation. This is the last act of individuation in the after-death state, the moment when you must embody fully what you have learned, without the safety net of the physical world. Pass through this challenge and you move beyond the realm where archetypes take form, refuse or falter, and you may find yourself drawn into another cycle, another incarnation, to continue the work. For those who move forward, the final crossing begins. It is often experienced as entering a light, but not merely a brightness for the eyes. This light is intelligent, loving, and utterly without judgment. It is the same light that appeared in fleeting glimpses in your dreams and visions in life. The same light that shone through acts of kindness, through moments of awe, through the eyes of those who loved you without condition. Now it fills your whole being, dissolving every trace of separation. You do not enter the light. You realize you were never outside it. In that moment, the concept of you shifts the boundaries of the ego. Even the refined ego that survived the initial days of death dissolve entirely. You are not extinguished. Rather, you are expanded beyond recognition. You become the witness and the witnessed, the dreamer and the dream, the question and the answer. This is what the mystics have always pointed to when they speak of union with God, the Tao, the absolute From the perspective of the living, it is the end of the story. From within, it is the point where stories no longer apply. And yet, I must tell you, even this is not an ultimate finality, for the self is inexhaustible. What lies beyond the 49 days is another mystery, one that perhaps cannot be grasped by any mind still shaped by the conditions of human existence. But to reach this point is to have completed the work that was possible in the span of your earthly life and the sacred gestation that follows it. Whether you go on to merge into the infinite or return to the wheel of becoming, you carry with you the wholeness you have gathered here. And that wholeness will shape all that follows. I speak to you now not merely to describe a post-mortem journey, but to impress upon you that these 49 days are mirrored in life again and again. Every great transformation you undergo follows the same pattern. The initial disorientation, the confrontation with shadow, the meeting with guides, the crossing of thresholds, the shedding of old identities, the embrace of the self, and the final release into a new state of being. If you can live these cycles consciously now, then death itself becomes not an end to fear, but another of life's initiations, perhaps the most complete one. So I leave you with this. Prepare not by hoarding beliefs or clinging to certainties, but by learning to recognize the archetypes in your daily existence, by entering your dreams with curiosity, by making peace with your shadow, by listening for the quiet voice of your guide. In doing so, you will find that the 49 days after death are not alien territory, but the home ground of the soul you have been visiting in glimpses all your life. And when the time comes, you will walk that path not as a stranger, but as one who knows the way. And now, as we stand at the edge of this vision together, I want you to feel the weight and the lightness of what we have explored. The 49 days after death are not merely a doctrine or an exotic belief preserved in some ancient manuscript. They are the psyche's own reflection on the process of transition, the great initiation that strips away the last illusions and asks of you the most difficult thing you will ever do, to meet yourself fully, without turning away. Every trial, every archetype, every moment of stillness or terror in that passage is not there to punish you, but to bring you into a wholeness. You could not bear all at once in life. The 49 days simply remove the distractions, the excuses, the ways you evade your own depth. I've often said that what you refuse to face in life will greet you at the threshold of death. This is not a threat, but a law of psychic reality. If you spend your days chasing the approval of others, you will spend those early days after death wandering through halls of mirrors, each reflection shaped by someone else's gaze, until you learn to see your own face again. If you bury your pain so deeply that you convince yourself it never happened, the 49 days will open it like a sealed tomb, not to harm you, but to free you from the chains of forgetting. If you run from your shadow in every waking hour, then in the after-death state, it will be the only companion you have until you turn toward it and recognize it as the keeper of your unlived life. And yet, I tell you this not to provoke fear, but to awaken urgency. You need not wait for death to begin this journey. The 49 days are already hidden in your life. You taste them every time something in you dies, when a relationship ends, when your identity is shattered, when you lose a role you thought defined you, when a dream you cherished collapses. These are miniature deaths, and if you can walk through them consciously, you will be rehearsing the great passage. You will learn to recognize the terrain, to meet the guides, to bow to the archetypes without flinching, to step into the unknown without clinging to the known. I want you to imagine for a moment that you are already in that state. Strip away the clock, the calendar, the body, the familiar weight of your own name. What remains is the raw field of your being, a space where every thought and feeling shapes the landscape instantly. In this realm, the masks fall, and you see clearly who you are and what you have carried. If you can picture this now, you will understand why living with self-awareness is the most practical preparation for dying well. It is not about amassing beliefs, but about cultivating the kind of inner vision that can walk through the 49 days without being blinded. Some of you may ask, will I recognize those I loved? Yes, but not always in the form you expect. In that place, love itself is the recognition. You may see them as they were or as they are in the soul's truth, unburdened by the distortions of time and body. The meeting will not be about clinging or possession, but about mutual recognition in the light of the self. If your bond was built on truth, it will endure in a way that transcends form. If it was built on illusions, those illusions will fall away, leaving either a clearer love or an empty space where you once thought love lived. There will be beauty there, more than you can imagine, but also the kind of beauty that burns away what cannot survive it. Many fear the wrathful visions described by mystics, not realizing that wrath, in this sense, is simply the heat of transformation. It is the fire that purifies gold, the storm that clears the air. The soul does not meet this fire as an enemy, but as the last force that ensures nothing crosses the threshold. In the 49 days, you will learn that even destruction is in service to wholeness, and when the journey reaches its final moment, you will not be asked to answer a cosmic riddle or prove your worthiness. You will simply be asked to be what you truly are without hiding, without striving, without pretending. For some, this is the easiest thing in the world. For others, it is the most impossible. This is why the work must be done now, in the slow hours and the restless nights, in the conversations you avoid, in the dreams you dismiss, in the truths you fear to speak. The life you live now is the soil in which the seeds of your passage are sown. If you could feel right now the peace that comes in the final crossing, the moment when the I dissolves into something vaster, perhaps you would no longer cling so tightly to the fragments you mistake for the whole. Perhaps you would spend less time defending your image and more time tending your inner ground. Perhaps you would listen more closely to the whispers of the unconscious, for they are the same voices that will guide you when the body is gone. The 49 days are not a prison sentence, nor a maze designed to trap you. They are a sacred chamber, a temple built into the very structure of the psyche, where the self completes the work that life began. When you understand this, you begin to see that death is not the opposite of life, but its mirror. One reflects the other, and each gives meaning to the other. To live well is to prepare for death. To understand death is to live more deeply. So I leave you now with this image. You are standing at the shoreline, the waters before you, shimmering with a light that seems to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Behind you, the land of the known, your history, your roles, your stories. Before you, the sea of the unknown, vast, silent, waiting. You cannot carry your possessions into this sea, nor your titles, nor your masks. Only your truth will float. And as you step forward, the water rises around you, cool and luminous, until it closes over your head and you realize you are breathing it, you are made of it. You are home. Live now, so that when you arrive at that shore, whether tonight or decades from now, you will not hesitate. The 49 days will be a path you know well, each step a familiar rhythm, each vision a face you have met before, and when the final threshold comes, you will cross not with fear, but with the quiet joy of one returning to the heart from which they never truly departed.